I guess we could go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. Good evening. Thank you so much again for joining us tonight. We are here to learn about grief in the workplace. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, my name is Happy Reno. I'm the Executive Director of BC Bereavement Helpline, and we are BC Bereavement Helpline. We are a province-wide nonprofit that provides support for anyone going through grief and
Want me to
loss
go?
across BC. Um, just gonna, okay, that's good. Thank you. And here with us tonight is John Dubay. Let me just go ahead and introduce him. John is a registered social worker and registered clinical counselor in the province of British Columbia. He began his work in the area of suicide and bereavement in the 1985, responding to family and community needs to suicide, homicide, or traumatic death. His primary counseling area is working with clients who are bereaved due to homicide, suicide, or traumatic death, and he works with individuals by encouraging them to find answers within and utilize their own resources for real change and heal. He believes in providing respectful and safe place that supports clients to do reflective work and discover new ways of coping, integrating in painful events while navigating their world. Over the past 25 years, John has conducted numerous workshops and trainings to professionals such as therapists, counselors, teachers, social workers, and hospice staff on topics such as grief, the basics of complex bereavement issues, bereavement due to suicide, homicide and multiple loss, and suicide prevention intervention strategies. That includes professional self care, communication, and program evaluation and outcomes. So, without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce you to John DeBay. John, go ahead. You may take the floor.
Good morning or good evening. Sorry. Let me share my screen. Okay. So we're going to talk about grief in the workplace, but I first want to do is just acknowledge the land, which in the broadest sense talks about the birds and the fish and the animals, the plants, the trees, all that is around us that we are currently meeting in. And I want to acknowledge the indigenous land that I live, you live, work, play, and learn on. So in the chat, if you wouldn't mind in the chat sharing the land that you are currently being guests on. So just take a moment and I'm going to continue with our presentation, but please continue to identify the indigenous land that you are learning and living and playing on as recognition of their stewardship. Let me just clear my screen. Oops. So we're doing an introduction. Yeah, a little bit, you know who I am. Happy was able to I explain who I am. We're going to talk a little bit about what is grief. For some of you who've attended some of the webinars from the bereavement helpline before, this might be new information, repeated information, but I always like to start on the same page. So I'm going to talk a little bit about definitions, talk about the cycle of grief. I have a little Slinky to help me explain a little bit more about the dynamics of grief. We're going to talk about personal grief in the workplace. So, those of us who are grieving, how do we show up in the workplace? What is it that we need in the workplace? What's it like to be in the workplace when we're grieving? And then we're going to explore a little bit about how colleagues can be supportive and respond to that grief in the workplace. So we're going to look at you and me grieving in the workplace and how can our colleagues show up to be for us. We'll talk a little bit about being kind and being gentle to each other throughout the evening or for the next hour. So definitions of grief, so the definition of loss, it's an intentional or unintentional separating from someone or something of value. So oftentimes we associate loss with the death of an individual, but it also means that we separate from them. It could be moving into a different city where you have made the decision to move away, and that is a loss. So we have to keep in mind that loss can be intentional, and it's more often than we look at unintentional separation. Bereavement is not a term that's often used, but it's a term that is used in my language because it speaks about the entire or holistic experience of what we would normally call grief. So bereavement is the state of being around how loss impacts us emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually, and relationally, or the interconnectedness between each other. Grief, its definition, is mostly focused on the emotional component of bereavement. And that's the word that we used most common because it describes the intensity of our emotions around this experience of loss. So that's why we tend to use the word grief. Where grief is the internal piece of the emotional component. Mourning is the external expression of the pain that we may experience. It's the customs and rituals and things that we do as a collective or as a village in the expression of our grief. So, grief is the internal expression, and mourning is the external expression. Complex bereavement is the experience of grief, bereavement at a multi-layered, multi-time, intense experience that persists. So complex bereavement, you can think about it, it's like an onion and it peels over and over and over again. And it significantly can interfere in the day-to-day functioning of an individual. So that's complex bereavement. Anticipatory grief is when there is an expected expectation of loss in advance of a death or in advance of a move. And oftentimes, the way I describe it to people is that there's this push and pull. I want to stay connected, but I also need to let go. And so there's this ongoing struggle between staying connected and recognizing a loss is about to happen. And then we talk about disenfranchised grief. And disenfranchised grief can happen in the workplace frequently. And so we'll talk a little bit, I'll tell a little story about an disenfranchised grief and how a friend of mine responded to that. Disenfranchised grief is where you can't really openly acknowledge the loss and the grief that you're experiencing because of the separation. I also want to talk about the three burdens of grief. Some of you may have heard of this before. The first burden of grief, of course, is the primary loss, the separation of the significant component in our lives, person in our lives. It's the death and the loss that is considered the primary uh, object, or person, or event, or situation. The second burden is you. You are forever changed. Um, you're not the same. And so you need to, so in many ways, you grieve yourself, your old self. Priorities change. How you interact with other people has changed. How people interact with you change. And so we're going to talk a little bit about today in the workplace, how things change in the workplace, how you change, and how other folks change in the workplace. And of course, the whole relationships, family, friends, they change. And the third burden is how they support you or how they may not support you. And so sometimes we have to let people in around what is it that we need in our grief process. And so we need to either educate people on how to support us better, or we need to give them information, or we just need to be able to set boundaries. So the third burden is how we interact and how we seek support and validation and respect from those that are around us. So those are the three burdens of grief. This is what they call the grief cycle. And you can see there's a whole range of words. There's change, anger, reflections, guilt, bargaining, sadness, acute grief, regrets, numbness. Um, so the way I look at the grief cycle is I like to use a slinky, right? So a slinky, it's a circle. So there's an ongoing process that happens for you. So sometimes grief is very, very tight in its expression, or it can be very long in its expression. Um, Sometimes we feel angry in one section, and then we feel angry in another section, but we've moved. So it's not the same anger. It could be a changed or a different perspective of anger or guilt or feeling sad or feeling numbness. But this slinky can sometimes demonstrate that grief is an ongoing process. It cycles in and on itself, but there's constant movement and change. And so we're never in the same place. We're constantly on the move. So people who experience a loss have a lot of difficulty around decision making. Sometimes there's confusion. There's oftentimes inability to concentrate, memory loss, lack of motivation. You see job absenteeism or accidents and sickness happen often. This is not forever. This is only on the onset and lasts anywhere from from 3 to 6 months, sometimes beyond that, depending on the significance, the impact of the death or of the loss. So it's important for us in the workplace to know that sometimes the colleague that is grieving may not necessarily remember tasks to be done, or that they remember the conversation that you had with them the previous day. So, in many ways, when we're looking at grief in the workplace, it's really important for us to know that there's this impact around productivity, around not being able to follow through on tasks. So, it's important to know that these are very normal, common things that can happen to folks that have been highly impacted by a loss. And we'll talk a little bit about, well, what do you do? How can you be helpful? How do you apply your kindness and your gentleness into the workplace and still have meetings and still get tasks done and still focus on clients or still focus the job at hand? So there's this balance that needs to happen. These characteristics are considered normal, as I've mentioned before, but can be extremely difficult to manage in the workplace, both for the griever and for the colleagues of the griever in the workplace. So I just want to create a couple of bookends within our conversation. At the end, I really want to invite folks to think about situations that have happened in their workplace. And we'll have an opportunity to have some of you come and share that with all of us who are attending tonight. Okay. Personal grief in the workplace. What do you say? So as a griever, it's important it's important to know that you own the story of your grief. If you want to talk about the grief, talk about the grief. And talk about the grief in and with folks that you trust and feel respected and feel safe with. You also need to sort of be thoughtful about what to say, how much to say. So if the loss or the death was traumatic, do you want to share that information? Do you not want to share that information? So it's really important to know that there are boundaries that you can set up um, with your colleagues around what you want to say and what you don't want to say. It's important that your grief is your grief. Nobody has the right to it other than you yourself, who is going through it and experiencing that. So it's important maybe before you go back to work is to have a conversation with a trusted family or a trusted friend to sort of go over what you feel comfortable, what you feel safe with in saying in the workplace. When you're going back to work, it's difficult. Our society is not very open to grief in the workplace. It's a difficult place to be. We expect people to be completely present at work, even though they are in significant grief. So, as grievers, we need to really balance between being conscious we're at work and being conscious when we're home. Very difficult, not an easy place to gain balance about. Um, But it's important to think about how am I balancing my grief between work and home? Anger is an emotion that will come up in the workplace. our level of ability for frustration is quite low. So the trigger of being angry can happen quite quickly because of our frustration is so low. Our tolerance for frustration is so low. So we need to be really kind to ourselves and be prepared to go back to the person that you were angry with and maybe apologize, or be more gentle about that, or have had a conversation ahead of time to say, I'm not feeling really well. I might get really angry, and this is the situation. So when expressing anger, it's oftentimes quite difficult. And just take a moment, take a breath. Same with tears. Tears are very common in the workplace. At least that's been my experience. People express their deep pain and their deep sorrow oftentimes through anger or through tears. And so we'll talk a little bit about what you can do when those feelings are coming up and hitting you on your chin. Being uncomfortable. Grief is a very uncomfortable place to be. It's a very difficult place to be. And so you're at work and you're very uncomfortable. You can't breathe properly. Your emotions are right at your chin. Um, you don't know what you're thinking or what you're saying or what you're wanting to do. So it's a very uncomfortable place to be. And then there is your authentic self that wants to come forward. And you don't want to pretend that everything is okay because things are not okay. So, how do you handle that in the work environment? Some of us, from my own experience, when I lost a significant person in my life, I went to work the very next day because I wanted a distraction. I didn't want to think about the loss that I experienced. I just wanted to work, but I was a basket case. I was falling apart, which is an okay thing to do considering what the grief is all about. And so it's again going back to that balance between grief and living and being uncomfortable and no, things are not okay. And trying to figure out what I want to say, what I can say, and what I feel safe to say. Think about for a moment how you would respond to your emotional energy. Think about what you've done in the past when things have been very stressful. How did you manage your emotional stress? How do you handle emotional expression? So it's important to fall back on your past coping strategies. And sometimes it's important to be reminded, oh, when I was feeling really angry, I counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 to sort of take a moment, or I walked away, or so it's important to self-regulate your emotional energy, your emotional expressions in a way that you have done in the past. So fall back on your own history of coping and working through pain. So that's some of the things that go on. But what do you do? What, as a griever, what exactly can you do? And the bathroom. Sounds simple, but the bathroom is going to be your best friend, right? It's an opportunity for you to move yourself away, to be in a private space, and to be able to be where you need to be. So I oftentimes tell the people that I work with, grievers who are heading back to work, uh, bathroom is your best friend. creates safety, creates space, creates an opportunity for you to step back and recollect and um, find some emotional regulation, use some strategies around breath work, around body awareness, around just acknowledging the feeling that you're experiencing. So that's a first place. Most agencies, organizations, government departments in our country in BC, um, bereavement leave is 2, 3 days max, right? Um, and so what you may want to do is negotiate a gradual return to work plan. Um, can you go half a day? Can you go fewer hours? Um, Seek that support to be able to come back gradually into the workplace. So if that's available, please access it. Please use it as much as possible. We are not a very kind society around giving people space around loss. And so sometimes we have to advocate for ourselves at a time of great stress and great pain. We have to self-advocate for a little bit more breathing space at work. We talked about this before. So you have a right when you're at work to share and not share. So again, advocating for yourself, advocating for your grief story. This is your story. This is your time. What I've noticed when I've worked with folks who are heading back to work is what I call the porous boundary effect. And the porous boundary, what ends up by happening is we are in a lot of pain. So we're at the grocery store and the grocer and the cashier says, "Well, how's your day going?" And you end up by telling them your entire grief story. Or you're at the gas station and that happens the same way. So what happens is when we are vulnerable, when we are in pain, the boundaries that we have around us become porous. And so our emotional energy spills over onto other people. So at work, I've noticed that there's this porousness of our hurt energy on everybody. And so here's an opportunity to really be aware of that and to ensure that when you're sharing with folks that you trust and who will respect your confidentiality, who will respect your story, who won't try to tell you what to do or what you need to feel, but really seek out those folks that are going to be there for you. And it's difficult in a work environment. Make sure that you have a pot of tea or water around your desk. Maybe even have somebody solicit, um, get a colleague to help you with that. Because sometimes we get busy at work or we get focused on something and we forget that we need fluids. Also, drinking a lot helps you needing to take a bathroom break. So, again, that's a very helpful strategy. Take breaks. Go for a walk, get out of the office. Many offices have a 15-minute break in the morning and a 15-minute break in the afternoon and lunch. Lunch, depending, sometimes it's 30 minutes, sometimes it's an hour. Um, take them and try to get away off your desk and go somewheres. Uh, so really take those moments for yourself. Take those moments so that you can recalibrate, re uh, um, look at resetting your system. Hold space. Hold space sounds really easy, but it's extraordinarily difficult. So, holding space for yourself is where what it means is that you breathe. You take a moment and you reconnect yourself to yourself through your breath. Takes a few seconds, but holding space for yourself. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, deep, long breath, and let it go. That's holding space for yourself. And it helps reset your breathing system, your digestive system, um, your your whole nervous system can get reset by that. So hold space for yourself. Breathe. One of the most important things. What ends up by happening in our breath is when we lose somebody very important, somebody significant to us, they have given up their breath. And because of this connection that we have with this person, we also want to stay connected. And so we give up our breath as well, or we try to give up our breath. So, in order to reconnect with our life, reconnect with ourselves, it's important for us to be aware of our breath. So, holding space for yourself, creating that moment in time to recalibrate, breathe, reconnect to yourself. Very important. So, sometimes you're busy doing a report, you're fumbling around and you all of a sudden realize that you're just not focusing, honor that, take a moment, take a breath, refocus. Physical symptoms of bereavement. So, and this will impact work. So, sleeping patterns will change. So, you'll either sleep a lot more than what you used to, or you'll sleep a lot less. And so, if you're sleeping a lot less, you're going to be tired when you're at work. Or you might be still exhausted after sleeping a lot. So know that the lack of sleeping or oversleeping is going to impact your energy level at work. Your eating pattern is also going to change. So you might be not eating at all. So what you may want to do at work is to get snacks and to have them by your desk. Um, even grab a colleague and say, I need help with getting snacks for myself. Can I have you do that for me? So that's really important. Um, Connections. Sometimes what ends up by happening, another physical symptom is we want to push people away because we're so hurting that even our skin may feel pain. And so we don't want people to hug us, for example. And you have every right not to be hugged. So ensure that when you get hugged, you've given permission for that touch. Um, I know when I'm in a place of grieving, please don't touch me. I need, my skin is hurting. So when I get a hug, I'm also more hurting, right? So I would prefer people just be present with me. So physical symptoms are really important to know that it happens. And it's really important to know that you are in charge of how you respond to that. And maybe even get folks to help you with eating and with fluids and making sure that you're taking care of your physical self. Fear is another of the emotions. We talk about anger, we talk about fear, avoidance. So avoidance is a toughie, particularly in the workplace, because what may end up by happening is we get into the routine of avoiding work because we don't have the energy to cope with doing a particular task. So in the avoidance, recognize that that's what you're doing, that you're avoiding to do this task because you just don't have the energy to do it. What I want you to do in that place is I want you to think about, when do I have the most energy? So is it in the morning? Is it in the mid-morning? Is it late afternoon? When do I have the greatest coping energy? And that's when you do your avoidant tasks. So just be one, accept that you're going to be avoiding certain things. That's part of the grieving process that happens. And then book it or put it in your calendar. This is when I have greatest energy, and this is when I'm going to do that difficult task. Memories, last conversations, and triggers all sort of come together. In work, at work, there will be moments where a song may start to play and it'll remind you of conversations that you had with the person who's died. Or you may, um, I know a friend of mine who calls her sister every morning, and now her sister has passed. So every morning she has this trigger around not wanting to use the phone, but not wanting to use the phone because things have changed for her. Um, and triggers, like, for example, not just at the workplace, but going down a grocery aisle and looking at, oh, there's my person's favorite cereal, and you burst into tears in the aisle in Safeway, for example, right? Those things will happen in the office as well, where something comes across your desk and it'll remind you of the person that you've lost. That'll remind you of the person. So triggers will happen. Expect the unexpected. And be just gentle and kind to yourself. And bathroom, breaks. Get out of the office for a moment. Take some deep breaths when triggers are happening, and they will happen. Sometimes what happens is we feel nothing. We basically go on what I call autopilot. That means we do what needs doing and it becomes rote. Um, and so we become disconnected from our feelings, from our emotions. And then we start worrying about, why am I not feeling something? Why am I not crying? Why am I not in a place of tears or falling apart? This is also really normal, and particularly at work, because we have a certain mindset. I can be like this at home, and I must be like this at work. There's this social obligation or societal obligations that we fall into when we're at work. So sometimes we just disconnect from everything and just do what needs doing. If you become uncomfortable and you don't want to talk about the loss or about something, you have every right to change the topic, right? Change the topic. Say, I'm feeling really uncomfortable. Let's talk about this. Or sometimes I've seen people do, change the topic without any blink of an eye. Somebody's asking them, "How are you doing today?" Which is a question all on its own. And the griever answers completely different. Well, I have to this and this and this and this to do today. So it's really okay just to change the topic. Leave the vicinity. If you're feeling like your emotions are right under your chin, take a breath, go for a walk. If you're lucky, some offices you can go around the offices and come back to your desk, right? If you are lucky, and you have a private office, close the door for a moment, right? If you're in cubicles in an open space, get up, walk around the cubicle space, and come back, sit down. Leaving, getting up, going for a brief walk is very helpful. Being uncomfortable, we talked about that. What it means to be grieving in the workplace is really about the personal impacts the professional. So your personal life comes into the office space, and the office space you take home with you. Okay. Now, what do how can colleagues be helpful to somebody who's in grief? What do you say? Sound familiar? So, follow the lead of the griever, right? So I'll give you a little story of what do you say? So I had a friend of mine come to me and say that he had just found out um, that a colleague of his at the place of work that he was working at, she had had a miscarriage. Very devastating event. And he came to me saying, "What do I say? What do I do?" So, and so he said, "I've been avoiding her because I don't know what to say." And I said to him, "Okay, the next time she comes around and is heading your way, stop, pause, and just say to her, 'I heard some sad story. I'm with you,' right? Or say what comes from your heart. 'I don't know what to say, but I'm with you.'" So that's what happened. So she came down the hallway, he was at the other end, and instead of running away, he said this time, I heard what happened. I'm really sorry to hear that. How can I be of help?" And she was able to share with him a little bit of the pain that she was experiencing. And in that conversation, she shared with him how it was so um, supportive to hear somebody acknowledge the loss that she had experienced. And they became very close after that. So the courage to say, "I don't know what to say, but I want to let you know that I'm with you," is so very important. Balance grieving, and living. So again, how do you balance work with a life-changing event for a colleague of yours? You need to balance, create space, support, and still need to get to work. So responding to anger, know that it's not directed at you. Don't take it personally. Breathe through that anger moment. Breathe through it and just be okay with it. It's not about you. Same with tears. Just be present. Ask if they want a hug, right? Oftentimes, when somebody is in tears, we want to hug them because we want to soothe our own experience and our own discomfort. But if I'm crying, I don't need to be touched. I'm okay. And so ask the person when they're in tears, what is it that they would like? Do they need a hug? Do they not need a hug? Are they okay with me just being here? I'm okay too. Be uncomfortable. It's okay to be uncomfortable in the face of grief. Can't fix it, cannot take the pain away. It's a feeling of helplessness sometimes, and that's okay. So don't pretend that everything is okay. Respond. So you can see that there's this as so as you understand the griever, so you understand how to be supportive of that person. So let the griever tell you what they need, right? Maybe it's just a listening ear. Maybe it's a confidential listening ear. Maybe it's just witnessing. That's all you need to do is witness. So be there for the grieving person. Take the courage to be simply there for that person. Be like my friend. Acknowledge the loss and be there. Be the active listener. That means set aside your own story and listen to their grief story, their pain story, and just be present with them. And if you can, say the person's name. I'm sorry to hear about the loss of your mom, right? This is really important. You're not going to add more pain. I've heard this many times from people that I've worked with. It's it's a balm to them when they hear the name of the person that they have lost. It's like, good, this you're not forgetting so and so. The person is still part of this friends circle, colleague circle. Remember, you're not creating. You can tell I've been looking at this slide. Acknowledge the incident. And unfortunately, in a work environment, you may need to um, be very super gentle around redirecting back to the purpose of the meeting. So you may be having a one-to-one meeting with somebody about a particular task that needs to be done. The person breaks down, begins to cry. Say that's really normal. Be really present. Allow them to take a couple of breaths. Just be present. There's nothing you need to do except witness, and that, and then say, I know it's really hard right now, and maybe let's get a bit of distraction and let's finish this task, right? Or even ask, do you need a break? Do you need to get a glass of water or something? And then come back and let's continue our meeting. So be kind and gentle and still have to get work done. Acknowledge the pain. Remember, I said, I know that, and sometimes I am very careful around using the word pain, right? Acknowledge that, there's a lot going on for you. Like, I hear that, I see that, right? And then be very gentle. Come back. Do you need a glass of water? Do you need a moment? I'll step out. I'll be back in a few minutes. Come back. Bring a glass of water or something or tea or whatever. But take that moment and give that person some space. And then remember your own internal things because you're going to get triggered yourself. Grief is in all of our lives. And so when somebody is grieving very openly at work, it will remind us, right? And sometimes we might get a little bit judgmental around, well, when I lost so and so, I came to work and I was perfectly fine, or and this person is falling apart all the time. Blah. No, don't go there. People experience grief in all sorts of different ways and in all their own unique processes. The most important thing for us to do, being present for a griever, is to not judge, to be kind, to be gentle, and to be present. Remember, it's their story, not our story, and expect the unexpected. When my father died a number of years ago, I was in a room with somebody, and the person said, my father just passed away. And it was like somebody hit me over the head, right? Because it's like now my grief pain and this other person's grief pain was ricocheting back and forth. And so for me to stay focused, I had to set aside my story and be present to this person, right? Because this person was my priority. So it's really important to be aware that people's stories are their stories and not the same as your story. And if need and if appropriate, you can always recommend or send somebody to a professional who can help navigate through that journey of grief. Training. If you're a colleague in a work environment, maybe get some training, attend a webinar around how grief shows up in the workplace and what can you do and what you may not do. Developing responses. So today, this evening, we talked about responses. I'd like to open it up to folks um, to share to how do they manage grief when grief is in the workplace. So I'm gonna open the chat as well, but if people can,
Okay. John, we have two raised hand. One is from Juliana and then Melanie.
so Melanie.
Hi, John. Thank you for your webinar. I have a question. I'm sure a lot of your examples we could bring into the workplace. I just finished doing my end of life doula
Oh,
training,
okay.
and I work at a long-term care
Mm.
facility. And I was thinking to come to this webinar because I wanted to um, bring grief into the workplace. Like we have so many people that pass away, and we'll do an honor walk, walk them out of the building, and then it's just like we brush our hands and then we get
Yeah.
back on the floor, and we don't get that whole process of the grief that we should, because then it we end up becoming that coworker that is grieving because we haven't dealt with it. Like the next 24 hours, we have a new resident in that person's room. Um, so yeah, so I just kind of like, bringing into society that it is natural to grieve, but how do we bring it into a facility to,
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough because I didn't talk about when your client dies or when you're in a facility like a hospice where folks are constantly going through the process of giving up their breath and the family are left behind. However, staff are also left behind in many ways. And so looking at developing rituals within for staff, by staff, within those complex care environments or um, places where death happens a lot. I think we don't do a very good job taking care of the staff who take care of folks who are dying, and I think it's paramount that that happen. Training should happen. Rituals for staff should happen. Um, Space for people to talk about the person who's died that's impacted the staff. Management should be involved in that process really like in a hospice society or in a complex care agency or organization, it's super, super important. Or you do burnout really bad. So there are strategies, training, rituals, access to counselors, um, creating a space that's open to having conversations about death and dying are all key elements within those types of organizations. Thanks, Melanie. I think, yeah, you bring a very, very important point. Juliana.
Hi. My question was more about traumatic loss.
Oh,
So
yes.
earlier in the presentation, you were talking about setting your boundaries and what you want to share with other people. But I find for myself going through traumatic losses, I never know what I want to share because I don't know what's appropriate. And I'm afraid of like traumatizing people because personally, I feel fine talking about like everything that I've experienced, but I just don't feel like I have the understanding of what's going to be really upsetting to other people. And then I feel like I can't share anything, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. Because I tend to work in that in suicide deaths and in homicide deaths, I work very closely with families around what's their narrative, what is the story that they will be able to share or that they be able to speak about. There are some things um, that families will tell me all the painful details of the loss that I've been able to build capacity in order to hear that level of pain. And so sort of navigate with those folks around what is important to share and what not to share. And that is a conversation actually with somebody who you trust. And you sort of negotiate where that boundary sits with folks. Um, st I even go through stories with moms who lose children. So, like, say, for example, at a grocery store, and the cashier casually says, "Well, how many kids do you have?" So mom now has to think, do I say two children? Do I say three children? Because the next question is, oh, where are they? What do they do? Are they in school? And so there's this cascading effect that happens, right? So it's really important. Most people in society don't have a very good tolerance of hearing grief stories. Okay. That's that's the level first. The second level is having a conversation around the limits of what people can tolerate. And the third level is the third burden of grief. And that's where other people's expectations, other people's points of view, other people's inability to support becomes that burden of grief. Um, For me, the easiest way is to invite a close friend to a very depth conversation to look at and to explore where that boundary is for folks. And it all makes a difference too around if it's a close family member, you can say this much, this much. Public, you do this much, right? An acquaintance, maybe even less. And this amount, this amount, this amount depends on what you're willing to be vulnerable about. There's no easy answer, but I think what's important is to be kind to yourself, be like Brene Brown, and trust people that are trustworthy, that you have respect with, that they have respect for you. Um, but at the end of the day, I think it's a conversation. It's a conversation. Not everybody can hear the pain story, um, and some people can. So know that it's your story, though. Know that it's your story. I hope that was helpful, Juliana.
She's giving a thumbs up. Maybe I could add to that, John. So, Juliana and everyone, whenever you feel like you're isolated in grief and the people surrounding you doesn't know or you don't know if they can take whatever level of information you wanted to share with them, know that that is what we're here for, BC Bereavement Helpline. So feel free to call us. We are open from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And it's open Mondays through Fridays, and we have traumatic informed volunteers who can answer your call. So hopefully that would help you.
Yeah, yeah. Any, I just want to touch base really quickly. There is a chat. It says we had a coworker who died by suicide on her way to work a few years ago, and the community and was a community of grief at work. It was helpful that when we gathered and shared stories, and absolutely, again, it's that community response to significant grief. Absolutely. I have to go, but thanks. Okay. Any final comments, questions? Just blurt it out. So,
I like how when you showed the slinky,
oh, yes.
I shared a reel, like it was from Facebook, but it was a theatrical view of grief and the continuance of grief and
Yes.
how they're climbing the staircase and falling on the trampoline and back up the staircase and it really does. Like
Yeah.
it really does evolve and kind of grow with you in that regard. And I can't help but feel like you're bang on with the especially in the care community in the hospitals and people who work with that grief all the time. There's not enough care for the care aides.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And it's like, so oftentimes people, staff, because I work, I don't work in hospice, but I'm been involved in hospice. And it's very difficult saying goodbye to one of the patients Friday, and you come back on Monday and the person is no longer there. And there's no conversation,
Yeah.
there's no, and I think the organization really needs to think about a multi-level approach for the staff, for the staff.
Yeah.
It's exhausting work. Um, I worked for an AIDS organization in the 80s and 90s, where there were mass numbers of folks who were dying, and the staff.
Yeah.
It's very, very difficult work.
Tremendous. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Sherry.
Thank you.
Anyone else that would like to just make a comment before we go for the evening?
Just wondering,
Thank you. Oh,
John, if you're going to maybe share the slides with us so we could review them later.
um,
Really helpful.
happy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So everyone, like this conversation is being recorded, so it'll be uploaded in a YouTube channel for any references that you may need. Also, feel free to call our helpline for anything else. I could probably share with you the resources, although I recognize that we are over time, so feel free to leave if you have to, but I'm happy to share these resources for you guys to take a screenshot on if you need this.
But talking about the slides, let me give you a little bit of trick. We cannot share the slides themselves. However, if you go to YouTube and in the search bar for YouTube, you type in BC Bereavement Helpline, all of the webinars will show up there. And then you can rewatch the webinar and you
Oh,
can stop, write down some notes, start it, stop it, and that's how we can share the slides with you.
oh, okay. Didn't realize that. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thanks, Janet.
Right.
Yeah, so BCBH does webinars almost monthly, and they're all posted on YouTube. Fastest way to get access to them is just go in the search line for the YouTube thing is BC bereavement, and they'll all come up. Thank you, everybody, for spending an hour with me talking about death and dying. It's very important work that you do, and thank you again for coming.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much,
Travis.
everyone. Thank you, John.